Welcome, everyone, to today's webcast, Testing Your Endpoint Solutions the Atomic Red Team way. I will be just one of your hosts on this journey today. I'm, of course, Paul Asadoorian, the founder and CEO of Security Weekly. On the lines, which actually everyone else is on the lines via Skype, which we're supposed to say for the broadcast. But anyway, John Strand is here with us, of course, the CEO of Black Hills Information Security and SANS instructor. John, welcome today.
Seems like I just talked to you yesterday.
Yeah, we did. Did we talk today earlier? Maybe not. I get confused.
I tried. You keep throwing me to voicemail.
Yes. we don't get to talk all that often, except when we're on the air, like recording something. Is usually how it goes.
Exactly.
Also with us is Casey Smith, the director of applied research for Red Canary. Welcome, Casey.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And Michael Haag, did I get that right? Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Michael
Haag, yep.
The Director of Advanced Threat Detection and Research, also from Red Canary. Michael, welcome.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you guys for having us.
Yes, thanks for being here. Michael and Casey will be participating in the discussion in the first part where John and I will go through basically some stuff on how to test your environment and do this thing called attack simulation. And some of the things that go along with it. And Michael and Casey have some slides at the end where they're going to show us some cool stuff that they've done with the Atomic Red Team that, ironically enough, helps you test your security solutions. So this tends to now be some of my standard agenda for a lot of these webcasts. We're going to talk about attack simulations and testing your own environment and break that down into the problem you're trying to solve, the value you should be getting, how you measure the success of your security solutions and the security solution that is helping you test your security solution when you're ready to implement this technology, and what are some of the impacts. So of course, we always start with the problem, because there is Michael Santarcangelo asking us, what is the problem we are trying to solve, John? What is the problem? I always put Michael in there now, and he is there in spirit.
I've got to invoke. Oh, that's literally what I was going to ask. I was going to say if Michael was here, he would say, you think you know what the problem is, but the questions you're asking are not actually the problem at all.
And that's exactly where we're going to start, John, because you may think that the problem is that you're getting hacked, or you can't easily find indicators of compromise, or that the problem is my users keep clicking on stuff, or your problem is every time we bring John's team in for a penetration test, they're wildly successful in a very short period of time. And while these are all problems, John, I don't think they really speak to the problem of at hand, which is I want some kind of attack simulation or some kind of tools and techniques to not look for vulnerabilities, not necessarily exploit things, not look for misconfigurations, but I want them to test my defenses. And while many of these problems may lead you to going, well, I need to test my defenses, they're not the real problem.
Mm-hmm. And I think kind of while you're switching slides, I think it's not just testing defenses, because everyone's trying to test like technical defenses. I think one of the big problems is what is our ability to actually detect or to actually test? Sorry, I've got feedback in my microphone and my headphones.
No worries.
What is our ability to actually detect the attacks, but more importantly, react appropriately? And, that's one of the things that these guys have been working on at Red Canary that's been so awesome, taking that MITRE attack framework and then feeding it back into a series of scripts and basically beginning a playbook that we can actually test real-world attack scenarios effectively without having to hire an expensive pen testing company to do it. By the way, this is coming from an expensive pen testing company, by the way.
So, and just playing off what John just said, I have identified the problem, and you folks can agree or disagree in case you're Michael, chime in, that the problem that people are facing today is they can't easily measure the effectiveness of their security solutions. I think that also extends down into not just the technical security solutions, but the people and the processes as well. How do I measure how effective I am against any kind of attack? And specifically, and I think the MITRE attack framework, right? Like if someone were to materialize all of those different attack types in the MITRE attack framework, like how would I do? How would my solutions stand up to that? Not necessarily like my ability, but how would my solutions stand up to that?
And I think that kind of gets into the black magic of pen testing and attacks. We tend to put attackers into this weird kind of magical box. And it's kind of like I've been saying in a lot of my presentations, if you look at any representation of a hacker in the media, it's always somebody in a hood, it's always somebody wearing a mask. And I think that that kind of serves to underscore one of the big concerns about attackers in many people's mind who are not familiar with the attack technologies is the attacker is unknown. You know, they're shadowy. They don't know what's actually being done. And I think that we're seeing is we're finally starting to see a lot of these techniques being quantified down into repeatable steps that organizations can actually start testing the effectiveness of their security solutions.
So I also, kind of came up with these limitations, John, and I put this in here so that it could spark some debate. But if you then try and solve this problem with some of the other options that are available on the market today, you struggle to overcome some of the limitations. If the goal is to test my security solutions, well, in that light, penetration testing is a point-in-time assessment. Now, the previous webinar, John and I talked about penetration testing for an entire hour and how to use it effectively. In this light, pointing out the fact that it is a point-in-time assessment is somewhat problematic to solving the problem of I don't know where my security solutions may fall down at any particular time. I also think that... go ahead, John. We can talk about that point first. Sure.
Yep. I was going to say, like, one of the things that's important is that even though we talk about limitations of each of these different approaches, whether it's pen testing, vulnerability assessments, bug bounting, or internal assessments, it's not saying that that specific control is worthless. It just basically boils down to we need to know what the limitations actually are and try to have multiple overlapping fields of visibility so we aren't just relying on one thing. Because I remember years ago when pen testing first was getting started, everyone was saying, well, if a vulnerability assessment was done right, there'd be no need for a pen test. Well, that was garbage. And that was people trying to basically prop up vulnerability assessments and saying it was applicable to do absolutely everything. Now I see pen testers looking at bug bounty programs and saying, well, bug bounty programs are garbage because they're not comprehensive. You won't be able to control where the attackers are going. And that's not to say that pen testing is worthless or bug bounties are worthless. We need to be able to sit back and say, what are the limitations of these different assessment approaches and try to mitigate those weaknesses.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and the goal of this slide is to, in the light of I want to test my defenses and understand where they're working and where they're not, bug bounties isn't necessarily the right approach. I also, I read an article last week, I believe, that said, if your security architecture is built upon the fact that you have a bug bounty program, you are doomed for failure. Speaking to John's point of these activities and technologies have their place, but it doesn't solve all of your problems. I mean, nothing does, but it doesn't help you in that. There are benefits to these things, but not understanding their limitations helps us apply them more effectively. Also, John, we've talked about crowdsourced assessments. I think they're a good thing. However, that varying level of skill and expertise in the testers could sometimes work to your disadvantage, or, I don't think that you could necessarily use a crowdsourced assessment to accomplish the goal of, I want to understand like which techniques in the MITRE attack framework will be most successful in bypassing my security defenses.
I honestly don't know. I mean, when you're looking at this and bug bounties being so tightly intertwined with each other, my biggest problem isn't necessarily like the level of the skill or the skill level for the people that are actually doing the assessment or the bug bounty. My biggest concern is, do we have enough people doing this type of work that are actually skilled in what they do? So for example, let's look at bug bounties. I know a lot of fantastic security testers and hackers that are in bug bounty programs, and they do a great job, but there's only a finite number of them on the face of the planet. So if you're expecting crowdsource assessments or bug bounties to continue to grow exponentially, as a lot of people that run bug bounty programs would like you to believe, I still think that there's an amazing lack of talent that can actually pull these things off. And to be honest, this is the same problem we have in pen testing. In pen testing right now, trying to get really good people is incredibly, incredibly difficult. And some of those people, as much as you'd love for them to come and work with you, they decide to go work someplace else and break your heart every once in a while.
Certainly you can't be speaking from experience, John. So the final thing I had on here was internal assessments. And I think I mean, there's a lot of various aspects of internal assessments, internal pen testing, but I use the analogy, it's kind of like trying to debug and test your own code. You've created this software, you've built it from the ground up, you've developed tunnel vision into your own code, and while you can test it to a certain extent internally, you really don't get to the issues that you need to fix, or all of the issues, until you have someone else test it. And I think that's some of the one of the issues that internal assessments, just one, that they suffer from in the light of, I can build my security architecture, I can deploy security solutions in varying capacities, and I can test it myself, but I'm still going to not look at it as if someone were to be coming in from the outside, or if I were to have a tool systematically test my defenses. So, and John, I updated the slide today based on our conversation, and I think it was yesterday, and it took me some time to find it because I think the link you gave out on the show might have been wrong, but I did some Google searching and I found it. And so
possible.
I want to talk about the value of doing this attack simulation, right? And when I talk about value, I've been using this format. I first want to identify some low-cost ways in which you could potentially achieve your objectives and goals. And then I want to talk about some of the high-value results of even doing some of those low-cost things. So if you're going to test your security solutions, you want to first try and use open source and free tools to do that, to test your security solutions. So John, why don't you go through, of course, we're going to cover the Atomic Red Team later in this broadcast, but go through Caldera as well as our good friend, Chris Gates.
So one of the things I just want to kind of set the stage with MITRE basically was doing, I think that was fantastic, is they were trying to document out what different attack groups were doing, right? You know, what are the different threat actors, APT, 2, 4, 6, 12, Black Panda, Gothic Panda, Sad Panda, Grumpy Pandas, all these different groups. What were they doing? But in the process of them doing that, which I think they were trying to they were just trying to document what threat actors are doing. They created this amazing matrix of the techniques that these bad guys were using. And ultimately what it boiled down to is they saw a lot of the attackers using the exact same types of techniques, maybe in a different order, but they were still coming back to the same set of techniques. And a bunch of us in the industry kind of latched onto this immediately, like, this is brilliant. This is the same thing we're doing. This is the same thing Trusted Sec is doing. This is the same thing Guardians is doing. We are seeing these exact same types of attack methodologies being used. We're all using the same techniques. And then all of a sudden you started having these frameworks pop up where people are like, well, here's these commands that you can test. And I'm not exactly sure. I know that Atomic Red Team was the first that I saw that was kind of going through and saying, here's the attacks and here's some real world examples of these attacks. So without question, I think that was first. Caldera, I think MITRE was working on for quite a while. It has a lot of maturing to do as an automated framework. And now Chris Gates is also working on a tool, part of their Uber Git repository, uber-common/meta. And this is going to be, I think this is probably going to be one of those transformative things in information security. Instead of scanning and looking for all the vulnerabilities in your environment, instead of just basically trying to do threat intelligence feeds and try to figure out what different threat actors are doing and defending against those specific threat actors, now we can kind of work with a quantified, restricted set of techniques. And now we can test those techniques. And more importantly, to your bullet points on the bottom, you'll be able to know which security technologies are actually effective at detecting and stopping the different types of attacks that are coming down the wire. And that's why I think that it's transformative to what we're going to be seeing over the next 12 to 18 months.
Sure. Michael, Casey, any thoughts and comments on the value? You know, obviously you folks saw the value because you worked to create the Atomic Red Team, but what value do people and what value are they deriving from your tools, and more specifically understanding what their solutions, security solutions, can do and cannot do?
I think one of the values is not waiting to test. So a lot of people will wait for some of the things we talked about earlier, like a pen test or an assessment to be done internally. But we really see the value of people getting results really quickly by testing out of cycle. So anytime you want to test, stand up and run some of these tests. That's kind of what I see as the value.
Awesome. And it just
We've also seen.
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. No, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, yeah, we've also seen some organizations where they don't have an internal red team or like a full security staffed group. And so now they're using Atomic Red Team to go and pitch that to the business and show like, here's our effectiveness compared to MITRE. And this is what we're using. And this is how we're going to do it. And then they're able to go from there. It's really neat.
Yeah,
That's awesome. I also just want to say that Uber, when I was researching that, their GitHub repository has like dozens of tools on it, which I thought was pretty cool.
that's cool.
That's kind of a side benefit.
Blame Chris and Mubix for that.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So measuring success, and I really think that this is all about measuring success of your existing security solutions. It's interesting how we measure success of our solution that's testing our other solutions, which makes my head hurt to say that. But you know, your expected outcomes should be defined before you start testing your security solutions. You know, do your solutions allow you to discover malicious actors and or prevent breaches from happening? And that's really the question we're asking of our security solutions. I think probably many of us listening and all of us here today are kind of frightened as to when we ask that question, what the answer is, because it's not always that great in terms of what our products are actually telling us about. Are they telling us the right things? John, what do you think should be some of the objectives in terms of testing your security solutions?
One of the ways that we're kind of working at security now with some of our customers is looking at security as like DevOps or any type of modern development shop today. So usually whenever you're developing an application, if you do it right, and by just for the record, Paul and I have spent like a better part of a year not doing it right. And then of course, Chris came in and is helping us out quite a bit in doing things right. But one of the things that he preached all the time is you need to develop your test scenario of what your exit strategy or your exit criteria is going to be to prove success. So if you're going to do vulnerability assessments, what does that actually look like? If you're going to do penetration tests, what does that look like? And you can tie that in and you can actually set up some kind of testable framework. And that's why these frameworks, when we're talking about everything from Atomic Red Team to Caldera or whatever, it now is allowing security organizations to develop a test harness to validate and make sure that their security technologies are actually doing what they should be doing. And I think that that can actually be a fundamental change in the way that we handle computer security, in that we can say before we buy this product, our goal and objective is that data loss prevention will actually prevent data loss, or intrusion detection systems will be able to detect an intrusion in our network. And then we can set up a framework to actually test that technology and make sure that it's actually meeting those specific tests and objectives. The way security has been working so far is if you're a vendor, people give you money and there's no quantifiable success because it can go a long time without there actually being any attacks or any type of test of that product to make sure that it's working effectively. And I think that's a really, really cool thing. So if you're trying to develop your security program, you need to say, okay, what are our goals and objectives and test criteria for the security products? Purchase security products, test those security products with these types of scripts and validate the product is actually working the way it should. And that's just basically good development.
Yep.
Did you guys have more comments on that particular point?
Yeah, I was just gonna say you nailed it, because that's probably one of the most important things that I saw when we were starting to build this out was people are just buying things like, oh, this is artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's better than my other antivirus product. And so let me rip it out, throw this new one in there, but it's still not doing as great, or maybe it's doing a little bit better. But I never actually really validated it and confirmed it did anything better as far as detecting more like living off the land type attacks. Can it do proper PowerShell prevention or downloads of things that are coming through install util or whatever it may be? That's all pretty much the basis and the foundation of why we built it.
Yep.
Is it still very specific to endpoints, or like where do the deviations from testing endpoints, which I think is pretty easy to understand, especially in the scenario you just described where malware on the system, does my endpoint protection catch it? But are there other, and I know the title of this said endpoints, but when we start delving outside of endpoints, how can it help you test some of those other solutions that fall outside of your endpoint?
Yeah, probably there's a place where the attack that we're generating is putting telemetry on your network solution. So whether it's in your proxy or in some sort of network-based detection system, you would be able to see the effects or that attack emitted on the wire. So while some of it is network-based, a lot of the download cradles are going to reach out and pull something down. Hopefully you would be able to see that on the wire. Depending on if you're doing SSL inspection, make sure you can crack it open and see what the payload is, that kind of thing.
Well, and the other thing that I think is interesting is how many different scripts exist for detecting and testing lateral movement in an organization. Sure. So you can test something on a host, but it's not just specific to that host, but it's basically looking at how that host and how an attacker can spread from that machine to shares, pivot from that machine to access other machines and other assets as well.
Yep.
Have you seen people use it to test their logging and SIM capability in detecting indicators of compromise?
Have I seen people using Atomic that way?
Yeah.
There's been some of the folks that use it will make sure that say their endpoint telemetry system is feeding to their SIM or another tool. They would make sure that's the whole point of some of the testing we do, is to make sure that there's a lot of moving parts to make sure that event gets into the SIM. So having something that triggers it out of cycle and often instead of waiting for something horrible is a good idea. So we've definitely seen people using it for that. It's
a great benefit.
Yep.
Okay, so when are you ready to start evaluating your security architecture? Is just the fact that you have some security solutions in place and are starting to question the effectiveness, is that when you're ready? Like, when should people start considering and then start implementing technologies to test their solutions? Is it even before they put them in place?
I would argue you should be testing it even when you're evaluating a product or a vendor, right? So before it goes into your organization. So I would say as early and often as you can test, and that would be my recommendation for sure. Yep.
I would second that. Whenever we're talking to customers, we say, do this before we get there. We do not want to go through and find a bunch of these things that somebody can do for free. Right. Test it before the pen testing team actually gets there. It would be my recommendation. Anybody else?
Michael?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's kind of like when you buy that new firewall, you enable all the feature sets on it, all the whiz-bang stuff, prevent all the things, and then you start to back it off. During that eval, you may have only did a couple things, but now it's in production. You run these new things and you realize you're missing a bunch of things or missing a bunch of visibility pieces to it or prevention and detection. Like John said, I would do it all before a new pen test comes in.
Right. Yeah. So that's great advice. So you can use this to evaluate technologies, which I think is a huge area that is severely lacking in security today, is evaluation of products and even open source solutions that apply to security in our security architecture, and also using it to get ready for your pen tests or as a precursor to the pen test, which is great. So I thought the impact was kind of interesting, and we break the impact of a particular solution down into three different areas: emotional, financial, and logical. I think the emotional piece really speaks to trust and or confidence that the practitioners have in their particular solutions. And it's interesting, we've had this problem before. Like, if you polled a room full of security practitioners and you asked them, how many people here trust their security solutions even better than 90% today across the board? Like, no one does that. No one trusts their solutions today. So there's an emotional aspect to it where you don't have confidence in your solutions. And I don't think everyone would pretend to believe that once I properly configure my security solutions that I'm 100% protected. It's understanding where those limitations are that breeds the confidence. And if you don't understand when the limitations are because you haven't tested it, then your confidence is really low. So I think there's definitely an emotional aspect to it. Financially, I think your senior management is certainly the ones that are concerned about the financial investment. Am I recognizing some return on the investment in security? Is it being effective in whatever their goals are of keeping us out of the headlines or making sure there's integrity to the products and services that we're offering? So justifying that investment in security, and that's really where it was kind of first explained to me that there was a large company that had suffered a breach. They spent millions of dollars on security solutions. The team then sat around one day and scratched their heads, and they're like, "Yeah, we got all these solutions, but we don't feel good about them." So there's that emotional component. And did we just spend all this money and actually get a return on it, or did we just spend money for the sake of spending money? And I'm sure senior management is asking those questions as well. And that's when some of the technology was adopted to test their infrastructure to answer, both the emotional and financial. And I think that the logical thing for me would be to test these solutions before they come into the environment, not to determine if they work or not, but how they work, where they work well, so that then you can find the best logical fit into your organization.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree too. Like, you want to make sure, like, if you're going to bring a tool in, a lot of security practitioners have that go-to tool they use. You want to make sure that you can see what you're seeing and pivot off of that data, and that it becomes something that works with your workflow. So you have that confidence, and yeah, for sure.
Any other comments there? John,
good.
Closing thoughts, other stuff you wanted to bring up before we turn it over to Michael and Casey?
Let's kick it over.
All righty.
Cool.
Michael and Casey, take it away.
Yeah, so we tested a lot of things that really drove us to develop in this project, and so we're super excited to share this with the community. So what we saw as Atomic Red Team, and we think of Atomic, we think of those small discrete tests. So we sort of key off the nuclear theme, but the idea is really those small portable tests that people can use really quickly. And so I think that's what the atomic testing comes from. A huge shout out to MITRE, and John touched on this earlier, the matrix that they've built, the attack, the adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge that they've developed a really cool matrix. So you actually have a catalog or taxonomy to say, hey, what would happen if this thing showed up in my environment? And so we wanted to also, like John was saying earlier, like dispel the magic or the myth behind how the attack occurs and make it all open source. So if someone wants to know how an attack works, they can go pull one of our scripts and see the internals, and it's all open source, so they can customize it. So, and then lastly, we really wanted people to get off the ground and test right away. So really, a lot of our tests are harnessed with PowerShell or batch files, or shell scripts and other operating systems. So there's really not much to stand up here in order to do these tests. And so that being the case, there's a few gaps, like it's sort of hard to test C2, for example, with our framework right now. But for the most part, we can generate lots of telemetry to make sure your endpoint solutions see these different attacks that MITRE's cataloged. So, yeah. Again, there's the GitHub repo. It's open source. We're all Atomics, kind of the joke. We want to say, like, hey, we really need your help for people to pitch in here. If we see gaps or things that we need to add, we'd love to get the feedback and really turn this over to the community so that people have a tool they can use to test both incoming solutions or existing solutions. We sort of have in mind a smaller team, honestly, for some of this. So depending on organizations, we see large and small shops using it. But imagine that small security shop's got one or two people managing different security products, and they want to just quickly see, hey, would I be able to detect this square on the matrix? We hopefully have provided that in our open source tool, that people can go find that tool or find that technique and run that test and see, fire it down range, so to speak, and see what actually shows up. So we're really looking for that community feedback. So.
And
Yep.
Casey, Michael, are you also looking for people to contribute code? I would imagine that.
Yes, that would be great.
Yeah,
We've had
okay.
several people contribute. We sort of did a big push to get a bunch of things in there. We've had a few people contribute. So yeah, we're looking for people to provide us that feedback and contribute code techniques. If there's some gap that we don't have, we'd love to see people writing code for it.
Fantastic.
Yep. So this is really just kind of showing you where some of this fits in. So this is a graphic from the MITRE attack page, and you can see the kill chain, so to speak, and then the different tactics on the right-hand side. So everything from persistence to command and control. So we really just wanted to make sure we call out, like, we don't own the MITRE framework. That's something they've built, and give them a shout out for creating that taxonomy. And then our framework, Atomic Red Team, lets you drill into one of those specific areas and say, I want to test credential access, and you can drill into that tactic and then find specific techniques. Like, is it looking for passwords in files? Is it looking with a credential dumping tool, Mimikatz or some other tool like that, and driving you into specific test cases to see what shows up. So that's where this sort of fits in the MITRE framework. I'll let Mike talk a little bit about the repo here at this point. So I'll turn it over to you, Mike.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. So this is just the Atomic Red Team repository on GitHub. We have everything broken out by Linux, Mac, and Windows. Each one has their own matrix in there. So if you go into Linux, you'll see the Linux matrix, and anything that's highlighted blue has something in for that technique. So you're able to click it, go in and look at whatever you want to look at. So for like Windows, we broke it out. It's all in there. So you can go execution, PowerShell, and a bunch of one-liners in an MD file there. So you're able to copy, paste, do whatever you want to do from there. It's super easy to use. And that's how it all started, was just a lot of one-lining techniques, more or less. And then as we kind of progressed over time, we began to build out artifacts. And inside the artifacts directory is what we call chain reactions. And so on the next slide, for the next image here, we have our chain reactions. Right now, I think there's like 8 or 9 of them. Is that right, Casey?
Yep. Yeah, there's 9. Yep.
Yeah, 9 of them in there. And each one performs different things. So we have one that's very heavy on discovery. It'll just generate a lot of noise on an endpoint. We have some that pulls down, for instance, like Bloodhound, executes Bloodhound, queries your domain if it's open. Just lots of endpoint telemetry, along with mixing in as much as we can for like Windows event logs, if you're using Sysmon or anything like that. Very powerful ways. And so we started off creating those in batch files. We started building some out in PowerShell now. And then kind of over time, we'll talk about the future, what we're going to do with the rest here. That's how it all began.
Michael, are these?
go ahead, Paul.
Oh, just Michael and or Casey, are these noisy attacks or stealthy or kind of a mixture of the two?
They're a mixture.
It's sort of,
some of the discovery scripts like Mike has written should certainly set off a lot of commands. Some are stealthy in that they use, like Mike was talking about earlier, living off the land techniques. Mm-hmm. So they're using trusted binaries to evade security products. So I would say there's probably a mixture of both. Some things are going to generate quite a bit of noise, and some things that you may not catch, like an MS build payload, for example, may go undetected by a lot of tools. So,
sure.
Yep.
And this is a chain reaction that we built. It's a batch file, and you can see how we outlined it. Kind of from the top, we give you some adversary information related to on the MITRE, for MITRE's stuff, and then down kind of goes to each tactic. So we break out each tactic and technique that's used. And then within the batch, you can see the scheduled task being created, the PowerShell code downloading a payload. And then for the rest of this, chain reaction, this calls out the different pieces. And when we build the chain reaction, we try to make it to where you take something from like the beginning of all the different tactics to like the end. And so for us, the end is down to execution, because we don't have much down in command and control. So we try to get as much as like discovery, persistence, execution, and we try to add it all in there at once, just to generate noise in an environment. So you're able to see, hey, we see failed logins in our Windows logs. We also see, PowerShell downloading something bad. And then what did we miss, right? Is there certain things that we're not seeing, like scheduled tasks being added in the organization? And did it actually run?
Do your scripts provide feedback to the user to determine if something was successful or not? Or is it up to the user to go then look in their environment and see if they saw anything, or is it kind of a combination?
Oh, that's a good point. Right now, we don't have anything that would show like successful completion. So it would be up to the operator running the script. But that's actually would be really helpful. So if somebody that may be running it later on, we could have something that just show, this, task created, task deleted, something like that. Right now we don't have that sort of output in our framework. I was going to say
that would be nice, but I don't think it kind of would serve the point, right? The point is, can someone detect the attempt to
Yeah,
run a lot of these different things.
that's a good
I
point.
mean, the pen tester in me is like, yes, we want to know if the service created, or I could mount a share, I could do these different things. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is whenever you run these different commands, is the customer or is the organization that's running these scripts able to detect that?
Sure, good point. Yep. I think, and I'll kind of take this last one, and someone pointed this out to me in feedback on the project, and I thought it was really good, and I want to use it in all the time. Every time I talk about Atomic, is just because you pass the Atomic test
Mhm.
does not mean you're ready to face an actual adversary. So we want to make sure you're never really content with these detections, and there's always going to be those gaps, and so constantly pressing and making sure that anytime there's something that you're running, what if an adversary introduced small variations to the command, or something on the command line, or if they use PowerShell interactively versus using a command line encoded command. So there's all sorts of things adversaries will do to sort of throw off your detection. We've provided a base, a low bar for people to start the test, but we would expect you to adapt and experiment with these tests in your own environment to make sure that you would catch those variations. So, yep.
And that's kind of the risk that we run a lot of times. People say, well, if I just change this in just this little way, we can totally bypass everything. And I think that's not the point. We have companies that we work with that actually go through this to try to make sure they can detect as many of these as they possibly can. And as an attacker, you may be able to obfuscate a handful of these, but I don't believe that you'll be able to successfully move or escalate privileges in an organization without having to run some of these. So
Yep.
there might be a handful of things that you can try to trick out, but at the end of the day, you're going to trip on some of these
Yep.
as an attacker. And I think that's the point.
Yeah, there's sort of that. A lot of people talk about like attackers only have to be right once, and if you sort of flip that around, and like attackers have to bypass every single layer or be perfect, so they don't trip any of these detections, is also just as valid from a defender perspective to make sure that is there anything anywhere in your environment that would create a signal that you might then be able to investigate or analyze and pull back what the attackers were up to. So, yep. So I'll touch on this, and then Mike's got some things I think on maybe the framework piece. But one of the biggest gaps I think we see today is just some coverage gaps. So there's some places where there's techniques that we just don't have a harness or an execution path for. So we'll constantly be pushing for, as MITRE updates the framework, the matrix, and also as we look at coverage, like trying to add new techniques and things like that. So I'll let Mike speak to the last 2 points there.
Yeah, feel free to hop in too, Casey. So probably one of the next biggest thing we want to make is like some sort of framework that has it all either all built into it, or make it to where it's modularized enough where you can just pull things down from GitHub as you're using it. So like we've kind of envisioned it more like almost like invoke obfuscation. So where you have like menu driven, you could build like your chain reaction on the fly, kick it off, and just run from there. Just pretty cool. We're looking forward to working on that more. And then metrics and measurement, that's something. So today we're using Roberto Rodriguez's Cyber War Dog on Twitter. We're using his spreadsheet to measure and track a lot of what we're doing. Sort of the next phase of that is building our own atomic measurement spreadsheet, or something to where we're able to measure these things more effectively against MITRE and show people like graphically where everything's at as well.
Yeah, and that's a good place for feedback too, is from the community, is like, what do you need? I mean, Excel works for a certain size organization, but what would be helpful for larger organizations to track coverage? So we're open to feedback on ways or things we could add into the framework that would help people track these tests over time to see how they're doing with detection. So, yep. Yeah, kind of ties into what I was just saying. We'd love to hear feedback. We've had good feedback so far. We're not afraid to hear critical feedback too if there's something we need to improve on. So definitely let us know what we can do to fill in the gaps. And we hope this is a tool that people find useful and are using quite a bit in their environment. So there's a link there at the bottom to email Mike and I at research@redcanary.com. We're happy to take that feedback and put it right back into the project. So I think those are the main things we wanted to kind of share today. So I don't know if there were any questions, but we wanted to make sure we left some time if people had questions for us. We've got a couple of references there for more resources on Atomic Red Team, a couple webinars. But at this point, Paul, I'll turn it back to you to see if there's any questions, or I don't know what's sort of next here.
Sure. So if people want to contribute code, do they email you, or just through Git can they submit pushes, or?
Yeah, we would just expect a pull request through GitHub. And we're working on formalizing a template so it'll be a little bit easier for people to contribute with a starting framework. So we sort of have a template on what the technique is, and then what's the payload look like that an operator would run to test that particular technique. Yep.
Awesome.
So I was going to ask a question. The Linux and the Mac side of the house, I think, are important. How is that coming along on your team?
So it's as far as gaps, that's one of the places we have some gaps. We have one of the other members of our team is actually working on filling out some more of the Mac components, Mac OS techniques. I think, I'm not sure the exact coverage count there, but we're definitely heavier on the Windows side than Mac and Linux at this point. But we've got some good coverage, and a couple of outside contributors have put in some Linux and Mac techniques for us, which has been very valuable.
Cool.
I think, Mike, I don't know if you have any insight into additional Mac OS techniques that are coming into the repo.
Yeah, I know there's I think a chain reactions getting dropped in there. And then, yeah, we have quite a bit of outsiders adding stuff to the Mac and Linux side. We had a big push right before DerbyCon where we pushed a lot of Mac coverage in there. So a lot of it's pretty fresh in there too.
Cool.
And another question from me, do you find it a bit odd? There's two things. One, you were talking about the attacker has to do absolutely everything right. And that's usually a phrase that we kept saying about the defender, right? And I think that that's cool. But isn't it also, from my perspective, I see Chris Gates working on something like this, because Chris was somebody that was is still an amazing red teamer, and he's kind of working in the same vein. You guys work in this vein, and I know, Casey, with your research, a lot of it is offensive, but I'm seeing more and more of these offensive people now starting to flip around and start coming up with defensive approaches. And I'd just like to get your opinions on what is driving this kind of shift in a whole bunch of our minds from just being purely offensive to now trying to contribute things to the defensive side of the house.
Sure. For me, like all my research, like offensive research, was generally driven by I wanted products to work. So a lot of my background with testing application whitelisting was I wanted to know where it worked and where it didn't work, and I wanted it if I knew that as a defender, that I knew where my gaps were. And so I feel like that's what's driving some of this for me personally is like, let's find what's actually working, what's a positive defense, and let's forget some of the other. If it's not working, it's not detecting, then why is it in our tool set? So that's I think for me personally, I want things to work. I want people to use products that are detecting these actual attacks. So I don't, for me personally, that's what motivates me is like, let's find where the gaps are. Let's see what's working and what's not. And maybe some of it, you see some of the impact of some of the research that you do, and then you get on the defensive side and you start seeing those attacks in the wild, and you're kind of like, okay, now I better make sure before every offensive technique I release, there better be some detection or defensive capabilities ready at the hand too. So,
well, that was kind of our reports. There was a lot of them, like especially with the beaconing C2 stuff, and people said, well, what product do we use to detect this? And there were no products.
Right.
And that's why we set out to make Rita, is to try to, develop something that could actually detect these types of very stealthy backdoors. Yep. And, I think it's cool. I think it's really, really cool that a lot of us that would be considered very offensive are now coming around to the defensive side. And because for years we were just accused of burning the places down and with little to no care about actually making things better. That's just not true. There's a whole bunch of us that do care deeply about trying to make things better.
Yep. And I think demystifying it, like you talked about too, there's nothing, a lot of these techniques or things that are surfaced in research, you can emulate those same attacks. And like in the MITRE framework, they have groups that track all these different capabilities or techniques. You can go and mimic that. If as long as people know what to do, that's where like kind of opening this up so people see, well, that's how the attack actually occurs. And that drives that research from offensive to defensive as well too. So.
Yeah, and that I think the demystifying, that's something that more of us have got to work on. We've got to stop being wizards trying to impress other wizards and trying to bring fire to the masses as much as possible, because there are people that are just getting started with doing endpoint security assessments. They have no idea where to begin. And I know with your work and what you've done and on Twitter and your blog and your Git repository has just been huge for a lot of people, because it makes that kind of that approach of trying to break these security products and really trying to find their limitations. It makes it a lot more accessible for a tremendous number of people in the industry. And I think that that's huge. It's all part about holding the vendors' feet to the fire as well.
Yeah, I have a question from the audience. Someone's asking what type of environment you need to set up in order to test these scripts. Is it host only, or do you need a Windows domain, or what do you need to get started?
Yeah, so really you just need, I mean, depending on the endpoint, if you like, if say you want to test Windows, we've kind of been targeting like Windows 7 as a baseline. So you really just need a Windows device, for example, instrumented with the solution you're testing. So if you're testing it against an endpoint product, you would have that product installed. You don't have to have a domain, doesn't have to be a domain joined device at all. Could be a virtual machine. So yeah, really there's low overhead to standing up these tests.
And another audience question, what do you see as the barriers to acceptance to this methodology? They really like this as an aid to assessments, but what are some of the barriers to people accepting this as something that everyone should be doing?
Maybe automation and maybe automation as a barrier. Like a lot of people will want to do this at scale. Maybe something. I mean, we're testing sort of niche. A couple endpoints at a time, a couple command lines. So there may be larger organizations that want to run these routines with automation. And that's where like Caldera or Meta, Chris Gates' project may fill in, or maybe less of a barrier if you're requiring some automation techniques.
I'd also argue getting sued by a security vendor or two.
Or
could be. There's always hope.
Could be problematic.
But also with the, you mentioned the automation and doing these things at scale. To be honest, most of these attacks, whenever they happen in organizations, it is an endpoint that gets compromised. And then these commands allow that attacker to then elevate privileges and move laterally. So that's one of the problems I have with a lot of people getting hung up on IOCs and trying to find, okay, well, we found this malware on this system. Let's scan the rest of the environment and see if we're infected. Well, that's garbage. If that attacker on that system was able to then move laterally and get legitimate credentials in the environment, trying to find that very specific indicator of a compromise, like a process mutex or something like that, across an entire environment is worthless because it's not telling you the whole story of what the attacker actually did. And I think that these tools actually help you understand the narrative of the different approaches that bad guys can go through, from initial exploitation to total domain take.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Have another audience question, have any of you guys checked out Unfetter, which looks like it does the same thing and comes from the NSA?
I've looked at Unfetter. My understanding was Unfetter was really designed as a measurement tool, but I could go back and look at it as far as like automation. But my understanding was it was to sort of help an organization see how they're doing against the various attacks. But I should go back and look at it again.
Sure.
I think that they have been updating it quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, we're advocates of whatever works. So yeah, I think like it's great to bring these different frameworks and test cases to light, because there's several out there, and I would encourage people to find what works best for them. Absolutely.
Right now, I think pretty much everyone is stealing from each other liberally, and that's actually a good thing. I'm not saying that's bad.
Yeah.
But I think that's what's going on right here.
Yep.
Do you know of anyone or have seen any results of, when we think of traditionally testing a security product, like we've identified maybe one, maybe two that we might bring into our environment, and we're testing just that one. I'm really interested in unbiased research that's testing multiple solutions in the same category. Have we seen that happen? John, I know you did a previous webcast on that topic, but has anyone seen research that's available for testing multiple products in an unbiased manner?
I haven't seen anything personally that would have let you. I mean, that's one of the objectives of this project, is to test it against multiple vendors, but I haven't seen anybody doing that yet.
It's a good call to action.
Yep.
And now, John, you did a previous webcast with someone on a similar topic. Is that true? There was an open source framework.
For which one?
There was an open
There's
source.
So many webcasts.
Open source framework for testing endpoint solutions. and their effectiveness? No? Maybe? They emailed us.
Vaguely, something's tickling in the back of my head.
They did a presentation at Black Hat and then released it open source. I probably should have included a link to it now that we're talking about different frameworks for doing that.
This was like mid last year.
Yeah.
So long ago. I can't remember the name of the tool.
Gotcha.
Oh, wait. God,
You will.
what was her
I know
name?
you will. It was a woman. What was her name? She emailed us and stuff. She did some great
But
research
she had like
too.
that whole spreadsheet and all the different things to try. It wasn't like an automated tool. It was just basically a list of different techniques to try.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
it wasn't a tool. It was a spreadsheet. And it had a whole bunch of things that you should test in an organization to do gap analysis. I can't remember what the name of it was, dude. I can't.
Gotcha. We'll publish that out there.
Yeah, cool.
We even put it in the slides. I don't believe there's any more questions from the audience. Anything else that anyone else would like to share on this webcast today?
I think I'm good. Thanks for having us.
Wait, there's one more
Yeah,
question.
thank you guys.
Last question. If you had to put all of your energy into one enhancement for Atomic Red Team, what would it be?
I would think for the framework that we're working on right now, like Mike talked about earlier, we really want to make this something that's menu driven and it lets people build custom things. So I think building out that framework is going to be an important next step, because right now everything's a little bit ad hoc scripting. And so really harnessing that into one utility that people can use, I think would be the next big push.
Gotcha.
That'd be the next big thing. And having really good ASCII art scroll down as you're starting it up.
ASCII art is huge.
ASCII art is big.
So
yes,
huge for making
that'd be a
tools
great
successful.
feature. Great feature.
Yeah, good call. Good call.
Well,
Yeah.
Casey, Mike, and John, thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. And you will get a copy of the slides and a link to the video for everyone who registered. So thank you, and that concludes the broadcast for today.
Thank you so much.